But you're very welcome here tonight for another edition of our media forum. And for those of you who've been here before, we try and debate, discuss and dispute issues to do with journalism and the coverage of news and current affairs. And at Goldsmiths, we love localism. We've got 2 student-run papers, which some of you have passed through and worked on, actually. And we've got 3 practitioners and Terry Kirby, who was very much a part of the local journalism world and is now teaching here. We've got 3 practitioners here to tell us about the real world of local journalism, how it makes a difference, why it matters, and they will really, I think, bring home the case to us. So I'm going to just hand over to Terry and everyone else.
We've got a mic here.
No, we don't.
We don't have a mic.
It's too close.
No, okay. Well, good evening and welcome. I'm not going to say very much, except that one of the first questions I'm going to ask these gentlemen here is, why does local journalism matter so much? And journalism matters so much to us here at Goldsmiths that we started 12 years ago a website called East London Lines to cover the 4 boroughs along what was the old overground East London Line, now called the Windrush Line. And we did that because there was even then, in 2010, 12, an identifiable gap in delivery of local news. And we were trying in our own little way to fill that and provide a training ground for our students. But we're the only journalism teaching department in the country that does anything like this, that produce a website that is news-based, that's outward-facing, that is not purely about the institution. In fact, it's not actually about the institution at all. It's about the local communities we serve. The local newspapers, when I started in my career many decades ago, where I first trained as a journalist, were the lifeblood, the bedrock of journalism in this country, whether it was newspaper journalism or broadcast journalism. Almost every journalist learnt their trade on a local newspaper, and you would move up the scale, move up to an evening paper, a morning paper, and then probably to national newspapers or onto the BBC and so forth. There was a whole ecosystem. It was a vital training ground for journalists, but it was also a vital part of the kind of local democracy, because people were able to, journalists were there to scrutinise the workings of local structures of power, the local councils, the local courts, local institutions of all kinds, private sector of all kinds. They were there. If councillors were in a council meeting, they expected the journalists to be there. It kept them on their best behaviour. And we reported the community back to the community itself. So it's very important. So many of those newspapers now that existed are gone. Partially for economic reasons, partially for, we all know about the effect of the online world. Advertising went online, particularly things like house ads and job ads, which were so vital in keeping local newspapers afloat. It's a very different landscape now. We have mass ownership of, through Reach and other organisations that own all the local newspapers. The BBC happily responded to some of that by setting up the Local Democracy Reporting Service, which Jason will talk to you about in a minute. These 2 gentlemen here, Ed and David, are responsible for community-led ventures in local newspapers. But they exist partially through the goodwill of people, partly through charity, partially through selfless endeavour to keep these things going to provide some measure of scrutiny to fill that gap that's been left by the decline of local newspapers. And so, anyway, that's why we're here, that's why it's important, that's why Goldsmith started East London Lines and its offshoot South London Lines. And over the years, our student journalists have trained on those websites and gone out into the professional world with that vital experience, which sadly is now much less available in local newspapers. So without more ado, that's my little rant. Jason, over to you. Tell us about the BBC's local democracy.
Where do you want me? Do you want me over there?
Do you want the slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Just slides on.
Good afternoon. Or evening. So, whilst that's me sorting those slides, I'll answer that top question. Why does local journalism matter? It matters because everything starts local. Every single story in the world is local to someone. Okay? And so that's why local journalism matters, because every single thing that happens in this world, every single thing that's important in your life, starts locally. Yeah? Westminster might make what we think to be the big decisions. It's your local council and your local authorities that make the decisions about when your bins are empty and the potholes in your road and how can your schools afford pencils and books. Is your fire service turning up on time? Are your ambulances turning up on time? Etc. 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 Every single thing is local to someone, and that's why local journalism matters. And local media, local newspapers, or local online organisations are the glue that hold communities together. Okay, you can live in an environment, live in a community, and if you don't have a local newspaper representing you, you will have no idea what is happening in your community other than what Bob on Facebook tells you is happening in your community. So local news is where it matters. Local journalists, local newspapers are the ones that hold to account. They're the ones who are regulated, they're the ones who are trained, they're the ones who know what the law is, they're the ones who know what is libel, what is not libel, they're the ones who know what contempt is, what contempt isn't, etc. 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 So local news matters on every single level. And if you're going to be a journalist in the future, the thing I will bang on about constantly, if you want to learn the trade, the place to learn that trade is local. You can walk straight to the BBC and you can be rewriting somebody else's work for the first 5 years of your life. You can walk into the Press Association and be rewriting somebody else's work for 5 years of your life. You walk into David's office or Ed's office, you're doing journalism on day one. You're doing day one of journalism, and you are holding to account, you are telling the story, and you are sort of the person that is responsible for making those who make the decisions, they're accountable for those decisions. So there you go, I can go now. Where's the, what am I doing that? Yes, I'm doing that.
Yes.
So who am I? So first of all, who am I? My name's Jason Gibbins. I am a lifelong journalist. I started my career in the regional press. I started in the early 90s on an evening newspaper in Northampton. I started on an evening newspaper in Northampton in a period of time that people of my age, who have left the industry, will tell you were the golden times. When we had newspapers, we had advertisers, we didn't have money for fun. They didn't give us it. They didn't give any journalists it. We've always been poorly paid. And I'll come back to that later. We've always lived on baked beans. So when you get your first job and you're living on baked beans, don't worry, we did the same, okay? So don't go for the money, go for the job. But, so I started in the early 90s, which a lot of people of my age now will tell you the golden times, and newspapers are dead now, the industry's dead. Why would you want to come on a media course? Why would you want to go to university and study to be a journalist? The industry's dead. It's not dead. It's not dead. It is as live and as exciting as it ever has been. And now you've got even more opportunities than I had. Tools of my trade when I started were a notebook and a pen. That's all I needed. Notebook, a pen, a little bit of training, and a gift of the gap. Always helped. But you guys now, you've got a notebook, you've got a pen, you do socials, you do video, you do audio, you do blogs, I'm so jealous of journalists and students going into the industry now. I've got so many different skills and so many different tools and so many different ways to tell their stories. The only way that journalism will die is if we don't have journalists to tell their stories and be there to hold to account, okay? So it's more vital than it has ever been. So I spent the first 20 plus years working in local newspapers. I moved on to be an editor of regional newspapers. And why did I do local, not national? It's because of the community. It's because we were telling the stories that mattered. Every story is local to someone. We were telling those stories that mattered on a daily basis. And we have influence and power, and everybody, when my journalists walked into a room, you know, like I said, the councillors and the magistrates, they knew they were there. They knew they were there. And, you know, and they knew they were telling their stories and doing their bit for the community. But I was also in local newspapers when times changed, when we've had to rebuild and had to find a new way of operating. And I'm full of admiration for people like David and Ed and Darren at the back of the room who are launching new titles in a really difficult marketplace, where there's still the same level of desire for news. What there isn't today is the same level of advertising. Like I say, we printed money for fun. When I started out in the industry, if you wanted to sell your second-hand bike, you sold it in the local newspaper. If you wanted to sell your house, you sold it in the newspaper. If you wanted to buy a second-hand car, you went to the newspaper. If you wanted to tell your dad baby, you put it in your local newspaper. If your granny's died, you sell it in the local newspaper. Today, if you want to sell your bike, you go to Facebook Marketplace. If you want to buy a bike, you go to Facebook Marketplace. If you want to buy a car, you go to Water Trader, wherever. You go to all these sites. And that has whipped the financial rug from underneath the industry. And it's been very difficult for an industry and a sector to rebuild from that. And I'm full of admiration for every single person who is trying. You know, and it also now, if you want to tell someone your granny's died, you put that on Facebook as well. You know, it's just, there we go. It costs nothing, but it doesn't keep newspapers afloat. So I did that for 20 odd years. I didn't leave the industry for the challenges it was facing. I left the industry because I've been doing it for 20 odd years, and I just needed a change. You know, I wanted to do something different, and I had an opportunity to go and join the BBC. I initially joined the BBC in 2015 in a online digital role, because hey, digital is the future and all that. And I was editing sort of BBC Online news stories. But that had been about 12 months when something called the Local News Partnerships was launched. And the Local News Partnerships was an agreement between the BBC and the local media to support the reporting of local democracy and to help sort of develop and improve journalism skills in the sector. With my background, it was just the perfect fit. I was working for the BBC. I finally got a BBC pension, which I didn't have in the regional news sector. But I've also then got an opportunity to get involved and support and develop the local news sector again, which is what effectively, you know, is my passion and ink running through the veins, etc., etc., etc. So the Local News Partnerships was created in 2017. We deliver three types of service. I'll do very briefly these. News Hub is something that we do whereby BBC Regional News Video, so on London tonight at 18:30, some of the video clips from that will be made available to all our news partners in London. If they so wanted, David and his platforms in London could use some of that video from BBC News Tonight, you know, that goes on there. So that's one thing we do. We do something called the Shared Data Unit. Shared Data Unit is a team up within my team, BBC employed journalists, and what they do, they effectively use open source tools to find the stories that aren't being told. So they will find stories that aren't being told. So there are thousands and thousands of government released or local authority released or police released documents, spreadsheets that are reporting the facts on whatever it may be. The relevant department will be saying they've done their job by releasing this data, releasing this information. It's publicly available. Nobody reads it, because why would you? It's impossible to find, and it's just spreadsheets and row after row of data and content. But hidden beneath those are some brilliant stories. And so my data team, it's their job to find those stories within those data releases and to share them. And we've done a lot of work on things like council finances. It doesn't have to be council with the data team, but we've done a lot of work on council finances. And that's been getting big hits. You know, we did a release earlier in the year that's got 2 million on-page views on BBC Online. It was a 5-minute package on the 6 o'clock news. But they're doing many, many different topics. They're doing a lot of work on drug issues across UK communities, even down to how many takeaways within a 1 mile radius of your home. You know, it can be a wide-ranging piece of data they do. What I'm here to talk about mostly today is the Local Democracy Reporting Service. So the Local Democracy Reporting Service is 165 local democracy reporters who cover councils and other public services on behalf of the BBC and other local news organisations. Terry was just saying, I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, it's just the background to know where we were. But Terry was just saying, back in the day, you know, every local newspaper would send a reporter to a local council meeting, and we did. One of the biggest challenges the industry found when that advertising revenue was whipped from beneath its feet was resourcing its newsrooms. You know, when I started as an editor, my first editorship was on a small weekly newspaper in a small market town, and I had an editorial team of about 7 or 8 reporters, 5 reporters, a couple of photographers, deputy editor, editorial assistant, someone working the post for crying out loud. You know, it was great. When I left the industry, I was editing 6 different newspapers jointly, and I had about the same size editorial team. Because what happened was, basically, you know, we were fighting for our future. The revenues have been absolutely destroyed overnight, and we had to do more with less. And that was the basic reality of our environment and our industry. And it's where these guys stepped in and started to build new models, which is absolutely fantastic. But we have to do more with less. When you're doing more with less, you have to make some really difficult decisions as an editor. One of the first things you do is things like council meetings are very long, and they can go on for 5-6 hours. They can be quite boring at times. You can go in not necessarily knowing what you're going to come away with. So as an editor, you've got 3 reporters sitting in a newsroom, you've got 6 deadlines on the horizon. Can I afford to send a reporter to cover that 5-hour council meeting? Or is that reporter better served for me writing as many stories as I can get out of them in an afternoon to fill a newspaper? That's my priority, I've got to get a newspaper out. And so, even unknowingly in a way, we step back from covering local government, we step back from holding those authorities to account. If you'd have said to me when I was an editor in 2014, 15, do you cover local council? I'd have got mortally offended. I'm going, yes, of course I cover local council, how very dare you? You know, but if I'd sat down and done a bit of a review on what we did, I'd have discovered that 3 years previously I'd have had a reporter in every council meeting from start to finish, regardless of what was on the agenda, just to be there, to be seen, to be a face, and to see what they could come away with. By the time I left, you know, that had gone from sending a reporter to parts of a meeting, to then sending a reporter to just one agenda item that we thought was going to be most important, to then perhaps the reporter following up with the council the following day to see what the decision was and getting a reaction, to then sort of relying on the council press releases. And this was happening across the country in every newsroom, and it created what we would start to call the democratic deficit. And so, as an industry, we started to recognise that in about 2014, and it was around 2014 when the BBC first had a conversation with the local news sector and said, is there anything we can do to support and help? And racing through those timelines, we ended up with where we are today. We innovated with the local news partnerships. And in 2018, in Kent, we hired our very first local box reporter, and by the end of that year, we've got about 130 of them covering the country. So this is what we do. So how does the local democracy reporting service work, and the local news partnerships more widely? Effectively, we support the news sector by delivering content to news wires. So as it stands today, we have 230 media organisations across the UK who have access to the journalism that we deliver, our reporters deliver. Those 230 range from the likes of Ed and David, the platforms they deliver, all the way up to Reach and ITV and the BBC and Bauer, you know, like one of the largest commercial news radio sectors in the country. So everything from single person outlets all the way up to the likes of Reach, you know, PLCs that employ hundreds across the UK, not as many hundreds as they used to, but employ hundreds across the UK. So that's for 230 media organisations, and between them, they all deliver in excess of 1,100 individual news brands. So again, David, how many do you know? 3 titles? Out of your newsroom? 3 titles? 6? There we go, sorry, growing all the time. So 6 titles from David's Edge, you've got a couple of websites, but then everybody up to, again, National World News Press Reach, who have, you know, I don't know how many Reach you've got these days, but 100 plus, should we say, news titles. So those are the organisations that receive our content. Regional split, so we've got there sort of on this one here, you know, predominantly print, traditional print, obviously all the print news outlets are online as well. But we don't just support print media and online media, we support radio, TV as well. And in terms of who regulates them, so you know, appreciate some of you in your first year, so things like IPSO and Ofcom might mean absolutely nothing to you, which is understandable. Don't mean much to me, to be honest. But these are the organisations that regulate these news titles. And I think regulation is really, really important in the environment we live in the modern world. I go back to Bob and Facebook, you know, he will say something on there and everybody will believe him. This is outrageous, this is terrible, what's going on? Society's falling apart, this town's not what it used to be, etc. It's just Bob on Facebook, yeah? Anybody that's employed by an organisation that's regulated by one of these will have certain standards to meet. You know, it will have to be true, it will have to be fair, it will have to be accurate. And if it's not, they can be held to account by their regulators. So, back to the local democracy reporting service. What is it today? We employ 165 reporters. Well, we don't employ, we fund. We, the BBC, fund 165 reporters. And they're employed by the news sector, the regional news sector. A selection of those 230 media organisations on that slide a couple of slides ago. They're the ones that employ them. So effectively, the BBC gives some of our news partners some money and say, employ a reporter, please. Now again, so David employs 3 reporters. Still right, David? That's 3, yeah. David employs 3 of those 165 reporters in his newsroom. David manages them, he tells them what to do, he edits their copy, he subs their copy, and he publishes their copy. When he publishes their copy, it goes to a newswire. I'll show you that in a moment. And then all of our other news partners can use that copy that appears in the newswire. So think of press association, but for local government, is the easiest way of thinking about it. So I explained to my mum, she doesn't know what I do after 10 years. So it's a newswire where all the local government copy goes, and all of our approved news partners can use that content. So again, so Ed doesn't employ any reporters, but he has access to the content, so he will publish content that's in his area. And their brief is very, very simple. It's to provide impartial coverage of the regular business and workings. It's very dull, but it's very simple. Impartial coverage of the regular business and workings of local government in the UK and other relevant democratic institutions. So other relevant democratic institutions are the health trusts, the fire authorities, the police crime commissions, and such like. Basically, if it's an authority that has some public money and they have minutes and agendas, then it's in scope for our reporters to cover. And it's going back to that time when I was editing a small weekly newspaper with a newsroom of 7 and could send a reporter to every council meeting. There's no commitment to send a reporter to every council meeting under this scheme, but we're getting a lot more reporters and a lot more council meetings than we were 8 years ago, and 9 years ago, and 10 years ago. And they're the ones who are there to hold your account. As Terry was saying at the beginning, hold their toes to the fire, to be sitting in that council chamber. And what we sort of really find is a reporter will go to a council meeting with an idea of what the main story of the day is, what's the big item on the agenda, you know. And we were covering those things generally, because you pick them up on the agenda, or they're building 4,000 new homes, we better do something about that, you know. And we tended to still cover those sort of things. One of the joys of the local Rock reporting service is the bits you don't expect to be the story. It's when a councillor says something totally bloody idiotic, you know, or it's when a councillor kicks off, or it's when a councillor comes to me racist like they did in the meeting last week, and somebody storms out. It's all those stories that you get that we would not have got by being there in person. Just briefly how it works then, so I've touched on a couple of bits. So we've got 165 reporters, funded by the BBC, employed by a selection of our partners, used by all of our partners, regional newsrooms across the UK. All the way from Orkney and Shetland, by the way, to Fermanagh in Northern Ireland, down to Kent, down to Cornwall. We've literally covered all 4 corners of the UK. The reporters write their stories in a very simple WordPress tool. So on the left-hand side, they just write it in this tool, very basic, very simple. And then somebody like David in their newsroom will edit it, will review it, look for any inaccuracies, look for any grammatical errors, etc. Is it fair? Is it balanced? Is it accurate? Yes, great. And David will hit publish. And then it goes into a newswire, and this is what the newswire looks like. So if I'm a news organisation in Cardiff, I will then see that story land in my newswire. Yeah, if that's hopefully making sense. If I'm in Knowsley, I won't see the story from Cardiff, but I'll see the one that relates to Knowsley. And then they can download the story, and if it's of interest, they put it on their platforms. So these next 3 are just a little bit old now, there's all of an old presentation, but so here's an example of a story in Devon. It's Plymouth Council budget, absolute classic nailed on local government story. You know, council budget's obviously really important. So for this story, a reporter in Devon, at that point employed by Radio X, a radio station down in Devon, would have gone to the meeting, would have written up the notes from the meeting. His editor in Devon would have published that story, and it would land in the newswire. And then when it lands in the newswire, it's available for use by however many partners in that area want to use that story. So in this case, it was used by Radio X, which is a Devon radio station. It was used by the BBC. It was used by Plymouth Live, which is Reach PLC. Same with this one, Lewisham, a bit more close to home. Again, you can tell some data because sadly the South London press is no longer with us, unfortunately. Another indication of the challenges we're facing. But South London Council buy a portfolio of 300 houses as emergency accommodation for families at risk of having business. Landed in the newswire, it was deemed significant enough to be used by the BBC, South London Press, a locally independent, and My London, again, by Reach. And again, Humberside, Yorkshire, Yorkshire Post, BBC, Whole Live. And so that's how it works, and you can see how that journalism grows. And what's really important with that is that one reporter in a council chamber is having their work picked up by multiple outlets. So as many members of the community as can be possible can find this content somewhere through their platform of choice. How big is it? This is how it's going. I should get you on and say how it started, how it's going, shouldn't I? So each year we publish, well, each week we publish around 1,200 stories, 5,300 on average a month. And since we launched in 2018, that number's obviously grown and grown and grown. That's how many stories have been published by this service every year. In August of this year, we hit our 500,000 target. We published our 500,000 story. So basically, in a nutshell, That's 500,000 stories over that time period, but without the local democracy reporting service may not have been told. Some of them have been told, but a large number of those 500,000 would never have been told, okay? Because of the way the industry has changed, with pressures on our resource, those stories would have stayed in council chambers or staying on agendas, etc. But we've told 500,000 public interest stories for readership and use and the interest of UK society. So when I go back to my point at the beginning, when you've got your job opportunities and you're putting out your CVs, start local. Start local. For me, remember me, right? It's an incredible opportunity. It's an incredible opportunity to get your feet on the ground and to do every single type of story that is out there. This is just a few. These are not selected for any other reason than I was yesterday going through just a spreadsheet I keep of BBC stories that I picked up. So these are just random stories. I didn't go on page view numbers. I didn't go on story interest. I had 10 minutes yesterday. I need a couple of slides to finish. And just, let's see what stories BBC have used in the past few weeks and just pick some random ones. And these are just a selection of the type of stories that come out of the survey. So when I say every single story starts local, everything is relevant to local government in some way, shape or form. You can see here, we're talking transport, we're talking councillors doing silly things and get suspended, we're talking paramilitary wings in Bedford, for goodness sake. That story is the owner of this new Bedford football club. It's not the actual Bedford town, again for the old parts. There's a new Bedford football club that's been launched by a bloke who's got TikTok presence and all that sort of stuff. And he's got quite a bit of money. So he's employed some vigilantes or paramilitaries to, not paramilitaries, sorry, he's employed some vigilantes to govern the streets, to walk the streets of Bedford, to keep the community safe. Something the police should be doing. But they've been branded paramilitary. There we go. Reform Council steps down after a week, surprise. Flag rows, again, transport, babies being told they're not told, whatever. Speed cameras, no confidence votes. What else have I got? Potholes, couldn't do this about any potholes. Health, tourism, every single thing. That fight we had in the Manchester airport, that was related to local democracy in some way. Andy Burnham had his say. It's an ongoing court case, so I'll stop saying that. Or is it over? I think it's over actually. But so Andy Burnham had a say on that. But again, it all relates in some way. It comes back to local democracy. So yeah, there we go. That's the local democracy reporting service. It's holding councils to account in your name. In your name. You will be paying council tax. You will expect your bins to be emptied. You will expect your councils to represent you in a professional manner. If they're not, we need somebody to tell you that they're not. And we need somebody to tell you what they're doing good as well, obviously. But we need people there holding their decisions to account, and that's what the local reporting service does.
Thank you, Jess. We'll do questions when everybody's spoken.
So David now? Yeah.
Just to confuse you, you've got two QR codes there, so if you can online. The top one is the site, just our site, which is probably to tell you a bit more background about it. And then the second is my LinkedIn, if anyone's got any interest in my rather boring posts on what's going on in the world of media.
Okay.
Well, I was running a local newspaper office as chief reporter. We had about 7 people, meetings almost every night, more than 2 or 3 meetings. Parish councils were a delight, 4 hours, and it makes me almost nostalgic for it.
Parish council is where they say the really stupid stuff.
Yeah, really stupid stuff.
That's the joy there.
Yeah, and they always went on longer than normal.
Experiment with the lights, so don't be frightened then. But yeah.
Just why Dave's preparing, just the other thing I would say is why local newspapers matter again more is because we've lost other sort of what you would recognise as blues of society. Things like in the last 20, 30 years, magistrates' courts have become centralised, health trusts have become centralised. All of these things have gone out of town. They're all in much larger outlets, and it's much harder to cover them and hold to account. So we need people in those rooms to do that.
And the other thing is, while we're on that subject, is offices in towns. When I worked on a weekly newspaper, our office was in the centre of town, and people will come in to place their adverts, but also to bring in their stories, look for a reporter to tell them something. And that's how you kept that connection with the local community. The networks that still exist of local newspapers are very much in name only. You might have one or two reporters covering a whole area, and they're very rarely based in any of the towns that they report on. They're on some trading estate somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Not a kind of part of the local community, not in the town centre. I think that's really important.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me. I'm David. I'm from Social Spider CIC, and as mentioned earlier, we publish a number of local newspapers in different parts of London. So borough-wide print and online publications in Waltham Forest, Enfield, Barnet, and Newham. We have an online-only publication in Borough of Haringey, and we have a hyper-local publication online in EC1 in the centre of London. So six publications in total. Here we have a prominent public figure who you may have come across, enjoying a read of one of our newspapers in happier times last year. This was Sir Keir making a visit to a branch of Boots in Whetstone High Street in London Borough of Barnet. He was dropping in to have a chat to the staff about life in Boots, and he was able to spare a few minutes to do an interview with me and also to get to grips with news in the area. And that the gentleman next to him is our now MP for Chipping, Barnet and Tomlinson. So even good enough for deeply unpopular prime ministers. That's one reason why local news matters. So what I do with my hair, as has been mentioned, published 6 newspapers. I'm the managing director of the company, so I am responsible for navigating the exciting business challenges that both Jason and Terry have mentioned previously, so I won't say more about them really at this point. But alongside my work managing the company, I'm also the editor of Barnet Post, which is one of our publications. So, does it matter? As we're discussing why local news matters, it's worth posing the question whether it matters or not. It doesn't necessarily matter to everyone. You're not obliged to be interested in what's going on locally, and some people aren't. But many people are because they choose to be, and other people are because they have to be. I think particularly in terms of the work of local authorities, which Jason has mentioned, in terms of the local democracy reporting scheme, is particularly important for some of the most vulnerable people in society who have the least power in society, that the work of local councils is scrutinised, because a huge amount of stuff goes on locally, whether that's working out whether someone has somewhere to live, or whether people have the social care they need, in terms of people who literally can't get out of bed in the morning, or vulnerable children who don't have anyone to look after them, and all this kind of work is primarily carried out at a local level. So certainly, it may be that local news isn't necessarily majorly important to absolutely everyone just getting on with their lives, or you wouldn't necessarily know why it's important to you, but certainly to people who are very dependent on the activities of public services, it's massively important. But then it is also very much important to all of us that the roads and pavements are safe, and for many of us, the libraries have books in. So there's a lot that does matter about it. I'm going to explore a few of the particular elements in a bit more detail. This is kind of the official version of why local news matters. So several years ago, maybe, was it in 2017? And I'm trying to think when the Kent Review took place. But the government, I think it was Theresa May's government, commissioned a review what was going on with news in the UK and the challenges it was facing by a lady called Dame Frances Cairncross. She produced a report on the government's behalf, and one of the things it did, very interesting report generally, and maybe you want to read it, but a particular thing it did was defining public interest news. So that is news which they amusingly said is often of limited interest to the public, but is essential in a healthy democracy. So this is really finding out the little bits of things that are going on locally, particularly the activities of local government, and so the humdrum task, as it describes it, the humdrum task of reporting on the daily activities of public institutions, particularly those at a local level. And so I think that's one of the key things. And I suppose, in a sense, it's interesting that Jason mentioned in particular the decline of advertising and the impact of that on local news. And I think for a very long time there was a kind of coincidental overlap between people's need to buy and sell their bike, or sell some carpets locally. There was a kind of coincidental overlap between that and the public interest function of reporting what was going on in the local area. And there probably isn't necessarily logically a great deal of reason why those things should overlap, but for nearly 200 years or so, 150 years or so they did. And we reached the point where that now doesn't work economically. I'm going to explore some of the examples of what we do and why it matters in slightly different ways. So firstly, big issues for local people that have a wider relevance. So one of our publications, Enfield Dispatch in London Borough of Enfield, we've done an awful lot of reporting on the issue of temporary accommodation, which many of you may be aware of. Large numbers of people across the country who are homeless, nowhere to live, go to their council and they tell the council they've got nowhere to live. The council has a legal responsibility to find them somewhere to live, but in many areas, and particularly in parts of London where housing is a big problem, there's nowhere to put them. The council doesn't have any spare housing. So what often happens is that people are put in different forms of temporary accommodation, so that could be houses and flats which are not in a very good state of repair, or it could be, as has increasingly happened over recent years, people are literally housed in bed and breakfast accommodation. And in recent years, due to the changing political climate, some people have got very angry and said, isn't it terrible that people are being given the chance to live in hotels? But quite frankly, if you're forced to live in a travel lodge and it's not of your choice, and it's a nice place to go for a couple of days, not really a very nice place to live for 6 months if you have no access to cooking facilities or any of the other elements that you would expect to have available to you in a home. So in Enfield, we've done quite a lot of coverage of the fact that hundreds of people have literally ended up living in bed and breakfast accommodation, particularly travel lodges on the A10 in Enfield, because the council has nowhere to put them. It's a national issue, a national problem around housing, but it's acutely experienced locally. So one of the second key areas, and this very much overlaps with what Jason's saying about the work of Local Democracy Reporting Scheme, holding power to account. So this is a story I had worked on this year. Barnet Council, this gentleman, Amar Naqvi, who was the cabinet member for finance for London Borough of Barnet. He was extremely proud of his day job as an associate professor at UCL Medical School. He went around telling people about it. He went on a council-funded trip to Nepal and offered to introduce some people in Nepal to his contacts at UCL Medical School. So very proud of his position. Although I got a tip-off saying, are you sure this guy who claims he's an associate professor at UCL Medical School actually does work there? So I looked into it, contacted UCL, can you tell us about Councillor Naqvi's role at your medical school? It turned out they'd never heard of him. So a bit of a strange situation. went through the council press office, said, can you check with Councillor Natby that he does in fact work at UCL as an associate professor. At this point, he doubled down on his claims. He sent additional detail about the jobs which he didn't and had never had. Asked the council press office to put them out in the corporate name of the council. They put out these additional claims when we published both his fake claims and the statement from UCL. We have no knowledge of this individual. We published that on the Monday, and on Tuesday the inevitable happened and he was fired. So that's an example of a local newspaper holding power to account. Obviously, he wishes there wasn't a local newspaper in Barnet, but that's the kind of thing that can happen. Probably slightly more positive stories here. So tell two different stories. One of the biggest things locally, the stories that people most really want to read locally in our areas are often stories around planning and development. I mean, many of us may wish there was more sort of opportunity to find housing in London, and this is a big frustration there isn't. But many people at a local level are primarily keen that housing doesn't get built, if we're getting completely honest. On the right-hand side here, we have the story of development in Edgware, which is a town centre area in the London Borough of Barnet, a suburban area of London Borough of Barnet. Not a lot of high-rise housing. There's a high street, there's a shopping centre, there's a bus station. Transport for London, in partnership with a developer called Ballymore, are seeking to build around 4,000 homes and a series of tower blocks by knocking down the shopping centre and knocking down the bus station. Local people are frankly quite cheesed off about it. They really don't want them to do that. So we've done a number of stories on this. I've done stories about the planning process. We've written up the fact that the council has taken a decision for this development to go ahead, which it has. My colleague Layla, who's in the audience, has done a very good sort of Vox Pops piece talking to people in Edgware about why they don't want this development. So that's really interesting angle on that. But this is I suppose the more investigative, if you like, piece we did on this particular story in July. So the developer, who are doing this very unpopular development, had basically been paying a consultancy company to get positive feedback about their development from people in the local shopping centre. Basically, they were concerned that loads of people were sending in complaints to the council objecting to their development. So what they wanted was to find some people who actually thought the development was good and get their points of view into the council. Not necessarily a bad thing in itself, in principle, but the method they went about doing that was literally having people with a clipboard standing in the shopping centre, going up to someone and effectively saying, hello there, I'm doing some consulting about local development. Do you think housing in this area would be a good idea? And the person would say, well, yes, I think I like the idea of more housing. And then they say, what's your name, what's your email address? Can we send in your comments that you'd like some more housing into the council in support of this development? Some may say that doesn't provide an entirely accurate kind of picture of people's opinions. And we ran this story about the way that this support was being canvassed, and it was quite an exciting moment for me, because this story is the first time that we successfully inspired a legal letter from the libel lawyers Carter Ruck. So that wasn't specifically about my reporting. It was about a comment from some of the local councillors who were not pleased with this process, and they accused. They seem to be accusing the developers of underhand behaviour, I suppose, is how Carter Ruck perceived it. So it was necessary for us to insert a message at the bottom of the article, being very clear that we weren't accusing the developers of doing anything illegal, and it's perfectly legal to get out in a shopping centre with your clipboard, ask people if you like housing. Perfectly legal. May or may not be a good thing, you're allowed to do it. I just like to clear that up now. Second story is a story where people do want the development to happen, but the council doesn't want it to happen. So a wonderful, wonderful flip story. Barnet Football Club, the football club of Barnet, as the name suggests, but not currently based in Barnet. They have a ground in London Borough of Harrow, across the border. These people, some of the Barnet fans, very keen for the club to move back into the borough of Barnet. They've applied to build a stadium on some playing fields in the borough. The council has rejected this, and it's extraordinarily controversial. They're very cheesed off. Obviously in the opposite direction to the Edgware people. But the interesting news story we had here was that in a council meeting, the leader of the council, sort of avuncular chap, Barry Rawlings, the leader of Barnet Council, always kinds of likes to give a straight answer to a question, even when it's really not in his interest to do so. So in this instance, he was asked in a council meeting, has the council suggested any alternative sites where Barnet Football Club could put its stadium other than this site where you've told them they can't build? Has the council suggested any alternative sites? And in response to this question, he said, yes, we have. We suggested 3 or 4 sites where they could build their stadium. This was news to council officers and to the council's press team. So when I contacted them and said, it's interesting that the council leader has said the football club's been offered 3 or 4 sites for a stadium. What are those sites? Can you give us some more details? And they, as you can see there, did an amazing reverse ferret. They had in fact not offered the club any sites at all. In fact, they haven't had any meetings with them at all for about 3 years before this planning application was put in. So the claim the council leader has made, I don't think he was lying, he was just speaking off the cuff, but his claim was entirely false. So these are kind of wonderful stories that we deal with, and that's going to run and run. Just finishing with one which I mentioned last year, but I'm bringing back because Jason liked it so much. So this is a report we did at one of our local democracy reporters, Josh Mellor in Waltham Forest, did on a statue of England football captain Harry Kane. You can see the perfect likeness of that statue. It's almost as if he's in the room there. So a number of councillors in Chingford, which is part of London Borough of Waltham Forest, they got a bit of council funding to commission a statue of Harry, who was originally from Chingford. Nice thing to do, really. Bad news was that they hadn't worked out where this statue was actually going to go. So for several years, this statue had been lovingly created and was left in storage somewhere in the vaults in Waltham Forest Town Hall. Due to the intrepid reporting of Josh, he continually asked the council, where's Harry Kane? Where is this statue? And we're told it's been funded. We want to see it. The people want to see it. Where is it? And eventually, not only did the council have to admit that it hadn't been put in places for a range of reasons, and first they were going to put it in a park, and someone objected for some health and safety reasons related to the park. They were then going to put it on the platform in Chingford Station, but that was not allowed because the drivers might be distracted by it. So there was a range of issues, but finally, due to Josh shedding the light on this story, Harry came out into the light and is now available to view in Chingford if you'd like to go and see it. So that is the power of local news. And that was picked up widely by the Guardian, the Big Issue, the BBC, all the top outlets.
Is it true it wasn't allowed to come out until Tottenham won a trophy?
That's possibly true. So yeah, I think that's about what I'm going to do for now. But looking forward to answering the questions later. Oh, I do just want to mention that I do have copies of the newspapers. I often bring them. I forget to tell people. 20 newspapers here. Do come and pick one up.
I'm going to put them right near where the
Yeah.
drinks and things are.
Very
Yes,
good.
thank you.
Did the councillor, the UCL, non-UCL man, the private eye rotten boroughs column?
Yeah.
I bet he did, I'm not surprised, yeah. You wrote that as well.
Okay, so should we start this? Yes. Okay, there you are. It's just.
Okay, hi, my name is Ed Jennings, and I run a news outlet called Authority Media. That name has appeared in the last year. Now I run two news titles, which I did not a year ago when I was here talking about this. So we run two different hyperlocal news outlets in Kent. One is called the Kent Current, which unsurprisingly covers the county of Kent, and one is called Local Authority, which is a terrible name I thought was funny 4 years ago. And actually just covers the Medway towns, which is one particular area of Kent, which is where I'm originally from, and where I sort of got into the news business in the first place. So the Medway towns are a large urban area in the north of Kent. It's not a particularly exciting place. You've probably got no reason to have ever heard of it, but it is the largest urban area in the southeast outside of London. It is a weird amalgamation of 5 towns that have been pushed together. We've got some of the richest parts of the southeast, we've got some of the poorest parts of the southeast, so we've got a very sort of mixed landscape in what we deal with. So, a bit like Jason touched on earlier, so I got into this because I'm the kind of weird person who goes along to council meetings even though I have no reason to. So, and I would go along and I would find a public gallery that looked like this. There was no one there covering them, no other residents taking an interest, and no journalists in the room, which is the bit I found a bit more worrying. So you've got 60 councillors sitting there making decisions worth potentially hundreds of millions of pounds, and no one is reporting what is actually going on in that room. So of course I thought I should just start doing it myself, even though I've got no background experience in doing this. I decided at that time I would just start tweeting what was going on in these meetings in a time when Twitter was cool and not a weird far-right hellscape. So I started tweeting meetings, it picked up a bit of a following, and of course my ego then went a bit crazy. So during the pandemic, I got it into my head, okay, we can turn this into some kind of vaguely functional news outlet. So I started seeing that people were setting up these email newsletters in hyperlocal areas. So we launched Local Authority, which is over 4 years now has become effectively a news website for the Medway towns in Kent. We started by effectively just covering local democracy, local decisions, and again, it just sort of spiraled from there. So we now cover, the arts, culture, sport. We interview local figures. We do a whole range of things. We put on live events. We somehow have tried to become a community outlet to cover the Medway towns that wasn't really there before. I should say as background, we're an area, despite the size, we have one local newspaper, that's it. There's no other sort of on-the-ground local news happening in the Medway towns. So we thought, we could fill some kind of gap here. And when I say we, I mean me and one other person. So we are running an entire news website with just 2 people. So in my first slide, when I describe myself as founder and editor, that is technically true, but I'm also sub-editor, writer, marketer, social media person, person of expertise, everything else that needs to be done, because that's the scale we're working at. I wish we were in a position to have more journalists on board, but alas, it turns out local news doesn't pay very well, as something we might touch upon as this conversation goes on this evening. So that said, we have received some awards. I always like to put these up because it's like the ones I'm actually proud of from this thing. So we've won a few awards. In fact, since I made this slide last year, we've won a couple more, but let's not get too excited about that. But we have been picked up by the Kent Press and Broadcast Awards for what we do, and I'm incredibly proud of that achievement. Thank you, that's very kind, thank you. Okay, so what do we do next? So it turns out doing a local news website for the largest urban area in Kent isn't actually enough to pay the bills. So it turns out that no matter how many paid subscribers you get, it's probably not going to be enough to fund the entire newsroom, at least under the model we're using. So we thought, okay, we've got bags of time, because obviously that's the one thing you have as a journalist, covering a local area. So we're going to start a second outlet, which is what we did earlier this year. So we decided to go for a much wider area. We're now covering Kent, and with a particular focus, of course, on Kent County Council. Now, those of you who may be familiar in local politics will know that Kent County Council was one of a handful early in the country that failed to reform, which, to be honest, has given us plenty of content to work with, and has been quite good at growing our readership. Right, so Kent Current looks kind of similar to local authority. We've tried to do some slightly fancier graphics, but that's about the only real difference. The content is fundamentally the same. We attend council meetings, we report on what happens in them, we interview local figures, we write about what's happening in the county more generally, and we try and do it in a slightly, let's say, not quite as dry way as some media outlets might do it. I often try and use something like private eye as a bit of a touchstone in what we do. I don't think we're as good as that, but we're trying. It's good to have something to aspire to. Right, so why does local journalism matter? This is a story we wrote a couple of months ago when we got a weird tip-off out of the blue that I thought, in the first class, couldn't actually be true. Like, a parent from a local school got in touch and told us, did you know that at Rochester Maths School they are running an essay contest about how great reform are, and you can win a Nigel Farage t-shirt if you do the best essay? Now, I don't know about you, that seems completely ridiculous to me, so I was like, okay, fine, someone's got a bit mixed up here, sent in some requests to the school office about the situation, and got like a lengthy response back, sort of setting out, yeah, this is something we do all the time, we do it for all parties, we get various political visitors coming, we do these essay contests, and we give out political merchandise as a result. Of course, we then started asking some questions to other political figures who had been along to Rochester Maths School to do these kind of events, and weirdly none of them had ever heard about any of these essay contests, and none of them had ever given any kind of prizes to give away to the students. At which point we obviously went back to Rochester Maths. I realised this story is actually quite similar to your one, David, with the council. You go back, and then they of course double down on it. They come back and tell us, oh, this is absolutely, again, we've done this all the time, so you're obviously talking to the wrong people, this makes no sense whatsoever. So obviously we published our findings, as we do, and from our point of view as a small local outlet, it suddenly went a bit crazy. The next morning I found myself in Politico Playbook with a section about it. The Daily Mail picked it up, the Daily Telegraph picked it up, and then weirdly, within about 3-4 hours of those things happening, the school announced there was no essay contest after all, and they would not be giving away any t-shirts, and they would not be doing this going forward. And I do get that is very much a kind of small example of this, but I do think it's the kind of story that if you don't have local journalists on the ground in a local area, you'll probably would just pass by. No one would notice the school would run it, and that would be that. Like, no one would really blink at it, because realistically a national paper probably isn't going to pick it up, at least not without the initial sort of like on the ground reporting in the first instance. And so local news, I think from my point of view, that's what really makes, it's getting those tips from local people that, they're not going to take those kind of tips to the Guardian or anything. I mean, they might, but whether or not the Guardian will listen, I don't know. But having a local newsroom where you can just sort of, pop in or send in a tip and just say, like, there's this weird thing happening locally, can you take a look at it? And that's kind of what we love doing as well. So, to throw out another example, I spoke about Kent County Council and reform. Obviously, we've had a lot of kind of, let's say, anti-immigration protests recently, and lots of people with a lot of very large flags. So we went down to one of these protests in Kent, outside Maidstone, outside Kent County Hall, where we found a man draped in a neo-Nazi flag, which is not something you particularly want to find walking the streets. But then more curiously, we found him posing photographs with 5 reform councillors at Kent County Council. This was a story we picked up, we ran with. I'm quite sad to say no other outlet picked it up and ran with it at any point. And nothing actually happened as a result, so you don't always get necessarily any kind of positive result out of the work you do. So much as we might all want to think our work always has a good impact or something, has a positive change, like in, say, the essay story, Sometimes an organisation might just stonewall you, not give any response. No one will, you know, everyone will ignore it. Everyone moves on with their lives, and that's that. Which again is fine. No one has to listen to what we're doing, but it's that thing of, you know, we're putting the news out there. At the very least, we've made people aware of what's going on. That's all we can do from our side of it. If other institutions or people don't enact at that point, that's, you know, that's fair enough. But that's all we can realistically do. So we have, across 2 titles, 4,500 subscribers. So I should say our model is effectively an email newsletter, as many, I guess, local news outlets are sort of switching to. So we've got 4,500 subscribers, 500 which very kindly do pay us for that work. They don't have to. All of the news is ultimately available for free. We only put slightly like frivolous content behind the paywall, say like interviews with arts culture figures, or, you know, just slightly more, you know, less important content. Actually, it's all important, I'm going to correct that. But in terms of like anything involving, say, politics, local democracy, you know, public institutions, that's all free, available to everyone. We're never going to charge anyone to view that content. And yeah, we reach about 70,000 people in a month, which isn't huge, but I think, you know, for a 2-person newsroom running 2 quite local news websites, not too bad. Yeah, so this year we tried to slightly professionalise our operation from 2 random guys running the newsroom with no experience. So we became Impress regulated, so we now follow the code of practice adopted by Impress. And we joined the local democracy reporting service, which is very useful for picking up stories from some of the council meetings we can't always sit in, because there are, yeah, across an entire county, quite a lot of them. And again, 2 people can only do so much. So the local democracy service is a very helpful tool in terms of covering a wider, perhaps, reach than we could usually manage. So that's been incredibly useful. Another thing we do is we try and really embed ourselves in our community. So we think this is one thing that sort of the larger local news outlets don't manage to do. I think part of the reason we sort of built the audience we have is because we are there, people know us, literally we walk down the street, people will stop us and give us stories. I don't think, say, the average Reach journalist probably has that experience when they're covering kind of areas they're covering. So we run quite a lot of live events. During the general election campaign, we ran a hustings for every constituency that we cover. That were attended by about 600 people across the 3 events. We do this on a much more local level as well. For local council elections, we run debates. We've started doing kind of other just sort of local gatherings where we sit and ask about important issues people care about, trying to ponder solutions, publishing the work that comes out of that. That part's all very early days, but it is something that we are trying to work towards. Yeah, and that's me and my colleague in about the one nice photo we have of us. So, right, okay, that's my TED talk on
Thank you very much. Yeah. Just to pick you up on one point there, where you said you didn't get a response.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad thing.
Not necessarily.
Because what we're like, you know, when I was sitting in those council meetings all that many years ago, you're like a burglar alarm. You're stopping people doing things that they might think about doing, I think, a lot of the time. And I think that's important. You know, you're keeping people from maybe doing the wrong thing, or, you know, not quite the right thing. And I think that's a key part of our role as journalists. Okay, so we're now going to take some questions.
We've got 20 minutes, and then we can continue the conversation over something.
We got 20 minutes. Okay, fine. All right. So who wants to go first? Anybody? No. Okay. Well, let's go.
I think there's a lady here. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm really curious how this model works if there are no advertisements and the subscribers are not.
The finances.
Yeah. So largely it relies on goodwill. So yeah. So being an email newsletter, the funnel is we get people onto our free mailing list, and then we do have a paid subscription level on top of that. I think I said in there that about 1/7 of our subscribers do pay for our work. As I said, they don't need to. The core news is available for free, but we are sort of, maybe foolishly, sort of relying on this model that people do see value in what we're doing, and, you know, to help pay us to sit in those rooms and follow those meetings and cover those stories that maybe other people aren't. So we do ask for a paid subscription, but yeah, no one has to pay it, but it's something that Thankfully, I think we've got enough trust certainly in the local area that we have got, let's say, 500 people who are willing to pay for our work. Obviously, we could do a lot more with 1,000, but 500 is what we have, and that's kind of where we are. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of the model.
It's
That's
interesting.
very hopeful that 500 people are paying for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Genuinely, when I started this thing, I thought I was going to be writing to like 20 of my friends. So that's it. So somehow we have found an audience.
I think the voluntary payment thing is interesting because the Guardian,
Yeah.
is helping to stay afloat with just by saying to people, give us some dosh, David, how does this your enterprise? How does the finances work?
Well, we have a voluntary payment element as well. I mean, for us, it's an intriguing mix of income streams, I suppose. Print advertising is still our single biggest source of income. So print advertising in our 4 print newspapers, that's sort of about 50 to 60% depending on the month of income. And then there's a mix of different online income sources, bits of advertising on the website, bits of advertising in our email and newsletters. There's a scheme called the Google News Showcase, by which Google tries to sort of wash its hands of the damage it's done to the news industry and steer the government away from legislative action by chucking a bit of money at news publishers. So that is a decent slug of money for us each month as well. And then the voluntary contributions that Ed's just mentioning, that for us is sort of 15-20% of income. We have around between 8 and 850 people across our publications making monthly donations to support our publications. So that's a big element as well. So yeah, that's the kind of mix, and then the local democracy reporting scheme as well, obviously supporting those reporters.
And Jason, the local democracy reporting scheme, it's obviously funded by the BBC, but I correct me if I'm wrong, did you not, or does it get sort of hypothecated government money?
No, it's straight from the licence fee.
Straight from the
So every penny we spend on the LDRS is, rather than another BBC service. Effect. So we just, obviously, somebody on a much higher pay scale than me looks at how much the BBC's got to spend over a period of time, and we're fortunate that the LDRS is proving to be good value for what it costs.
Yeah, and is obviously clearly also helping to support other ventures. Anyone else? Anyone? Yes.
Do you find like a rural and urban audience having like a different relationship to local journalism, like being engaged in different ways? Like maybe for you in Kent, you have a bigger rural community where you publish more urban.
To be honest, so across our 2 titles we've got vast areas of both. We haven't noticed a big difference in that. If I'm honest, the biggest divide in terms of our audience, in terms of who comes to us, I would say is largely class-based. It's kind of like our audience is relatively middle and upper class, and that is a challenge we face in how we reach sort of like working class communities. But then I think that's probably a slightly wider community generally, they're more disconnected from like news output. But yeah, I would say geographically we haven't really seen much of a difference in what we're doing.
It's interesting. Go on.
No, I was going to say, I think that's a really good question, because through the trail I started, everything starts local. What people care about is what happens on their doorstep. Literally what happens within 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 10 miles from their doorstep maximum, and that's what matters to people. London is largely a collection of hundreds of villages, and where I think that titles like David's and Darrell's are really, really good and really strong, they are focusing not on London, they are focusing on specific communities within London that are centred around pretty much, a high street or a borough, within a borough, and it is, it's just a large collection of villages. So even if you live in Barnet, you're not going to be worrying about what's going on in Croydon, but you're going to care passionately about what's happening in Barnet.
Yeah, I think in the kind of vast urban jungle, people do kind of somehow naturally still gravitate towards the idea of a small town or village concept of having an idea, an area that they can identify with.
Yeah, I think that geography is quite a challenge in London. It has presented quite a few challenges for local news in London. I mean, London Borough of Barnet, where I know it's actually mentioned, has a population of nearly 400,000. So it's got more people in the entire nation of Iceland. So it's in a way, so our publication is local, but it's also covering a very large population, and we have to be aware of sort of the Barnet-wide perspective on things, which will be relevant to many people in terms of how services are delivered, but in terms of the feeling of localness, if you like, that will often be at a much more local level. So we will be areas like Edgware that I mentioned now. People will feel more of an affinity to their immediate locality than they will to that wider London borough. So that's a tension you have to manage. You have very limited resources running a borough-wide publication, and it's also kind of an issue, I suppose, in terms of the local identity of publications and their sustainability. So there's lots for us to kind of think about there, and it's an exciting challenge.
I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you've got a largely sort of middle to upper class kind of audience, and I presume it's probably a bit similar with your publications. What's the kind of age generation demographic? Are we principally talking about older people or young people? Because there is really a kind of issue over young people, and their kind of understanding of the media, and whereas perhaps they might have sat in their parents' homes and seen the local paper being delivered, they don't get that experience these days, so they don't have those kind of contact points.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to look at this question again in 20 or 30 years' time to see what's happened. Because I mean, there's definitely that young people now are less interested in local news than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But I don't know to what extent that's true. I mean, I wasn't the most cool and exciting of 17 or 18-year-olds. But I don't think at that time my primary concern was going down the shop, getting the Hornsey Journal and reading about what had gone on in the council's overview and scrutiny committee. At that point, I think it's quite natural that teenagers and people in their early 20s are not necessarily fascinated by the machinations of local government, or even the fact that a local charity has put on a really lovely bring and buy sale. People have got other things they're interested in. So it'll be interesting to see when people who are currently young are in their 40s and 50s, how they're consuming local news at that point. I mean, my inclination is not necessarily that our reaction to it needs to be how do we shift coverage of the local council onto TikTok. I'm not sure that's necessarily the solution. I'm open to it and interested if people want to have a go at that. But I'm not so worried that people, as they grow older, will not be interested in finding out about what's going on locally. I suppose what I'm more worried about is, will we be able to create the sustainable business models to enable them to have the opportunity to do that? And I think that's the real question.
I think what happens as a general rule is people become engaged in local government when it matters to them. When you're buying a house, when you're looking for a school for your kids, that's when you become engaged in local government.
Making more use of hospital.
Yeah, exactly. That has probably over time, in my working life, that has probably moved back 10 years. It used to be people buying houses in their early 20s. Now, good luck with that. But but it's the same rule still applies.
Yeah.
I have a question about crime, because I was really intrigued that when you were picking out stories for us, obviously with local council, you're going to be picking out stories that are happening within council meetings, but generally in terms of what you were highlighting for us, you were giving us everyday interest stories. I remember the last maybe 2 to 5 years of the dying days of South London Press, and certainly my other local paper, every time it would come through the door, you'd look at it aghast, because the first 3 or 4 pages were just awfulness of crime, making you actually afraid to live in your local area. And I could never understand how that would have been appealing in the traditional model, either to advertisers or to the readers. I just wondered what your thoughts were on where we were then and how we got to where we are now.
Okay, so I think, yeah, crime I think is a really interesting one, because it's not something we've ever particularly covered in any meaningful way, because part of that is when I started it as just a one-person newsletter. If I'm honest, it's not something that interests me particularly much to write about. And as we've grown, that still sort of holds true, and also we don't really have the resources to send a journalist to sit in a court or anything like that. And the other thing I will say on it is that when I talked about the one local newspaper that still exists, they are pretty good at doing crime. So there's no point us necessarily overlapping all the same content, and there's no point us trying to do stories that they could probably do better. So I do sort of agree with you. I think there is an issue in terms of like just like deluge of depressing content. I think that's something we see with a lot of local news, but I think that is partly market driven. It is because people do read it, they are interested in it. But I think we have just taken a conscious decision to sort of go the other way, and probably why we are very small.
So I've got a two-sided answer on this, because I partly agree with what Ed's saying, but there's elements to it. So firstly, like, the reason why there's a lot of these crime stories is ultimately, although loads of people will tell you, we don't like crime in our newspapers, we want to read more positive stories, why don't you have to go on about all the lovely things that people are doing locally? And obviously many people are interested in that, but broadly they are actually also lying. And if you run the story, I mean, a few years ago we ran the story, drug dealer jumps on man's head. People absolutely loved drug dealer jumps on man's head. I really want to read that. I'm telling you, people are genuinely very interested. They may say they're not, but that's what they want to read. So there's definitely that element of it, that people do really want it. But the second element of it is I'm very concerned now that because very few publications have the resources, and I include ours in that, to actually send people to court and report on court cases and really give the full side of the story of what's going on in terms of crime reporting. Very often now what we're getting is crime reporting based solely on press releases from the police. And however much faith you might have in the police, and will be a spectrum on that, I'm sure, but however much faith, even if you think their starting point is great and they mean well, they're obviously picking one side of the story, which is these people who've been convicted are very bad, and big up the police for the wonderful things we've done in convicting them. That's the story they're pushing. They're not pushing the nuances of what's happened, in terms of how the person's been convicted has ended up there, but even in terms of the impact on victims as well. You're not getting that full spectrum of what's happened if you're just getting press releases from the police, which have a big headline and will generate the hate and anger, and as you said, the fear. It will give people that hit, but it won't give people the understanding along with it. And I think that is a real problem, and if the more that we could find ways to actually resource court reporting so people get a full picture, that would be...
I did want to say something about that, because I'm sure Jason's going to say something about crime, but I'm very proud to say that here at Goldsmiths we actually send our students to court. And they do court reporting. So we are, I think, one of the few places that actually do it.
I think, as an ex-crime correspondent, I have some thoughts on that. I think what you both say is very interesting. Two things, really. One is that when, on East London lines, when we're running it, which is it's not a weekly publication, it's a daily, we strive for daily publication. We could just fill it with crime stories, both what you might call happening crime and court stories, because they're generated by the police media, basically by the Metropolitan Police Media Department. So we do have to moderate it, and I think that was what you would be seeing clear in the South London press. It's a very easy hit, and people do read it. Drug dealers standing up, people will read it. So I think we have to be careful when we're on these online of picking out those stories which are of wider interest and the really serious ones. But there is also the issue about people no longer have the resources to sit in court cases all or for so long, because you need to get a kind of, you do need to have a balanced approach to court reporting. And if you're on you can do that on a weekly paper, but if you're running a monthly publication, it's a very different thing entirely. Also, a lot of those on the kind of weekly publications we're talking about here, a lot of those crime stories, which that happening crime stories, tend to lose interest. You lose interest, you know, a few days after the event. You also have legal issues as well, without going into with that, because you can't. You're a bit tricky about reporting events that happen. And if people get arrested and charged, you have to be really careful about what's reported. So there's a whole overlapping series of things there. Sorry, someone else had a question there. Yeah.
Yes, my question is, where do you search for local news? What sources do you use to find them?
Oh wow, that's a hell of a piece of string question. So there's kind of like the sort of boring daily routine, which is like trawl through local council documents published today, to go through like press releases from organisations like the police, fire service, all these kind of things. Then you've obviously got the email inbox where readers just send you things. There's reading just other local news sites and just picking up on what they're writing on, and can we take that and do something more in depth with that. To a certain depressing point of view, there's local Facebook groups, like they're horrible places, but they often will have a sliver of something interesting that can be then spun out into a story. There's no one real path for it. It's just sort of like, you get into this sort of like automated pattern that where you sort of trawl around all these places each day and just sort of, and you sort of get a sense of what things sort of, just appeal to you and what you can then start spinning out into a story.
Dave?
Yeah, no, I think that's all true. There's never a shortage of stuff to write about. When you're, as both of us are, you're covering quite a small team covering a large area, so people will get in touch and will want you to write about things using all available methods. Some people still bring up, it still happens. I mean, I was going to mention this as well, that we do still have two physical offices in Walthamstow and in Enfield. So some people do drop into the office and tell us about things they want us to write about. I mean, it's not happening lots every day, but it's happening a bit. There's once in the Enfield office, a lady turned up and said that she was going to run to be the president of Somalia, which was quite an interesting one. So she wasn't mad. She genuinely was. She was going to. She was originally a Somali lady. She was going to go to Somalia and make a bid to be the president. She wasn't ultimately successful. It was a genuine presidential bid that she was announcing from Enfield, and she came in to tell us about it. So that does happen.
Okay, a couple more questions. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, just on that, I mean, obviously it's not my domain anymore, but the true secret is to be good enough and well known enough for people to come to you as well, and establishing that reputation of being that local news provider, and people will come to you. Even though not many newspapers have a physical office anymore, and all power to those that do, but even though not many newspapers have a physical office, it's still being that known, and you had to tip off of that reform, and I did for our shirt, etc. Being seen as that trusted organisation, and people will come to you in the news. It's really mainly I just thought there's a great book. I can't remember what it's called now. What's it called? It's collection of stories about people coming into newspaper offices with a story. My favourite in my time was a woman walking in the office one morning. We were on press deadline day. We were struggling for a splash. We were struggling to do a thing. And a woman walked in and said the words, "There's a Lithuanian lorry driver living in my shed." There was. And he had set up home in her shed. He'd got a TV, he'd got a little cooker. She saw him go. She was council owned property. She saw him going in and out of her back gate. And thought, "Who is that man?" Asked no questions. Why he was there, he would mow her lawn for her. And that made them beg and
We all need one of those to do his job. And I think the other point to make is that throughout the country, and particularly in London areas, there are just so many people, community groups and organisations and lobby groups of all kinds that come to you. People have their stories, their interests, their issues to tell us about. So I think that's that is, it's just part of that structure that we exist in. Yes, you want?
Yeah, well, you kind of answered my question. I wanted to ask, since you started, do you feel like the community is seeking you out more and more? Like it's getting used to you being around?
Really?
Yes, yes. I think absolutely, and that for us has been, I suppose, something which in our areas we've had to build up a little bit, because and this is a particular thing I think in London. A lot of people have got used to local newspapers not being a local presence and not thinking that you can contact a newspaper if you have some, if you'd like them to write about your challenge or the good thing you're doing or whatever it might be. So in a sense, there's a kind of process of re-educating the public about what local news could do for them and how they could engage with it. Because to some extent people now don't expect it in the way they might once have done.
Yeah.
What I'd say about local democracy reporters on a similar theme is that they have established now a reputation over a period of time where they have a go-to person. People now know that I would regularly get emails saying, who's the local democracy reporter for? It's people more and more from the community who have got a story about their local council, and that can be via our website. Really, hopefully, they're going by your own, go to the office, which they are. But I'm seeing it more and more of mine as well. So the reputation is growing. It's rebuilding that understanding and staying consistent.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think there is that thing sort of what I touched upon when I was talking, that being sort of known in your community is incredibly important to make this work. And I think that can come in multiple ways. That can just come from people just knowing what you're writing and getting in touch, but also just engaging with those people as well in the first place. So we get into these sort of weird scenarios where you might write let's say fairly negative story about a politician or something, but then the next week suddenly they're sending you their press releases now, because now they know you're writing things, you've got an outlet, and now they want you to publish their stuff as well. So the longer you do it, the more you just start hearing from everyone across the entire community effectively. But yeah, I will say, as I touched on earlier, nothing beats just walking down the street and someone just stopping you and saying, hey, do you know about this? That is by far the best way to get a story.
Yeah. That is local journalism. on that note, I think we should wrap up. But
we can continue.
I'd just like to say thank you very much.
We're very grateful. We got some wine and beer and soft drinks and a cheese straw. Highly recommended. So please.
Is it just one between us?
Well, we're going to fight over it, but I think we might have more than one.
I'm going to